6 American soldiers were executed by their own country, not for cowardice, not for betrayal, but for refusing to commit murder. Their families were told they died heroes in battle. Their records were erased, their graves left unmarked. And for more than 60 years, the truth was buried so deep that even history forgot their names. They were Apache warriors, elite soldiers trained to fight America's enemies, who were given an order that crossed a line no human should ever cross: kill unarmed civilians or be labeled traitors. They chose death. This isn't a story about war. It's a story about conscience, about the moment when obedience becomes evil and courage means standing against your own side. Because what happened next wasn't justice, it was an execution, a cover-up, and a silence enforced by power, fear, and threats that lasted generations. And here's the terrifying part. This story isn't just about the past, it's about you, about what you would do if the cost of doing the right thing was everything. Stay with me, because by the end of this story, you'll know their names, and you'll understand why some truths are so dangerous they were never meant to be told. Now you tell me, what would you do if obeying an order meant destroying your soul? What if the uniform you wore with pride demanded something so dark that your ancestors would turn away in the spirit world? And what if saying no meant standing in front of a firing squad, executed by the very country you swore to protect? This isn't a what if. This actually happened. In 1944, a group of Apache soldiers were pushed into an impossible choice, one that history tried very hard to erase. These were men whose names vanished from official records, men whose missions were buried behind classified stamps and locked vaults. For more than 60 years, no one knew what really happened to them. What I'm about to tell you was never taught in classrooms. It never showed up in documentaries. The files stayed sealed by military intelligence until 2009. And the truth inside them doesn't just challenge history, it forces you to rethink honor, obedience, and the real cost of moral courage. Before we go any further, pause for 1 second. Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from, your city, your state, your country. And if this channel has ever shown you a side of history textbooks skipped over, hit subscribe. These stories only survive if we keep telling them, because this is a fight to bring the forgotten back into the light. Now, let me take you somewhere most Americans have never heard of. In the fall of 1943, the U.S. Army quietly built a training facility deep in the mountains of southern Arizona, just miles from the San Carlos Apache Reservation. Officially, it didn't exist. On paper, it was known only as Site 11. Its mission was simple and dangerous: train Native American soldiers for covert warfare behind enemy lines in Europe and the Pacific. The Army had discovered something it couldn't ignore. Native American recruits could move through terrain without leaving a trace. They could read signs in the dirt, broken branches, disturbed stones, details invisible to others. They could survive in the wild for days where most soldiers wouldn't last a week. But more than that, they carried something older than the United States itself. A warrior tradition thousands of years deep, a bond to honor, loyalty, and brotherhood that made them fearless in battle and unbreakable beside one another. Among those chosen for Site 11 were 17 young Apache men from the Chiricahua, Mescalero, and Western Apache bands. Different paths, same bloodline. Their grandfathers had fought the American cavalry. Their great-grandfathers had ridden alongside Geronimo and Cochise. The spirit of legendary warriors lived in them, and the Army planned to use it.
The man in charge of Site 11 was Colonel Theodore Ashford. Ashford was known for results, no matter the cost. Other officers called his methods excessive. He called them necessary. He believed Native American soldiers had to be stripped of what he called sentimentality before they could become effective weapons. So he broke them down. The Apache recruits were forbidden from speaking their language. Any sign of tradition was punished. They were pushed through brutal exercises meant to erase empathy, forced to kill animals in increasingly violent ways, told again and again that hesitation meant death. Ashford drilled one idea into them. Mercy was weakness, and weakness got soldiers killed. Most of the men endured it. They told themselves this was the price of war. If burying pieces of who they were meant protecting their families back home, then so be it. But not all of them were convinced. A small group began whispering at night, away from listening ears. They questioned what they were becoming. They asked each other if defeating monsters truly required turning into one. And quietly, they prayed to their ancestors for guidance. At the center of that group was a 23-year-old Apache named Joseph Running Bear. He'd grown up on the San Carlos Reservation, listening to his grandfather tell stories of the old warrior code. A true Apache warrior, his grandfather said, never harmed women or children, never tortured prisoners, never killed unless there was no other choice. Those rules weren't weakness. They were strength. They were what separated a protector from a murderer. Running Bear never voiced his doubts during training. Outwardly, he was flawless. He passed every physical test, earned the instructor's respect. When the Army selected a 12-man elite squad for deployment to Europe, his name was on the list. But inside him, something felt wrong. He could sense he was being shaped for a purpose that crossed a line his spirit refused to ignore. In March of 1944, his unit was shipped to England, then moved to a staging area in southern Italy. The Allied invasion of Europe was approaching, and special operations teams were being sent behind German lines to sabotage infrastructure, gather intelligence, and terrorize the enemy. Running Bear's squad received a classified assignment in the mountains of central Italy, a region controlled by German forces and dotted with civilian villages whose loyalties were unclear. The briefing was delivered by Major William Hartley from Army Intelligence. Hartley explained that German informants were embedded in the mountain villages, civilians trading information for food, medicine, and protection. According to him, those informants had already caused the deaths of dozens of American soldiers. The network had to be destroyed, and Running Bear's squad had been chosen to do it. Then Hartley crossed a line none of them expected. The squad was ordered to enter 3 villages, identify collaborators, and execute them on the spot. No trials, no exceptions. Age didn't matter, gender didn't matter. This wasn't a firefight. There would be no enemy soldiers. The targets were unarmed civilians, women who had traded information for medicine, elderly men who had done whatever it took to survive the occupation. Hartley knew the order would shake them. He told them this wasn't conventional warfare, that counterinsurgency had different rules, that fear was a weapon. Killing collaborators, he said, would send a message to every village in the region. And then he delivered the final threat. Refusing a direct order in wartime was punishable by death. Joseph Running Bear sat there in silence. His face gave nothing away, but inside something shattered. He looked around the room and saw the same horror staring back at him from the eyes of the other Apache soldiers.
They had trained to fight soldiers. They had prepared to kill and battle. This was different. This was murder. That night, Running Bear gathered 5 men he trusted inside a bombed-out farmhouse near the staging area. Men who had survived Site 11 together. Men who had become his brothers. Thomas Whitehawk, Samuel Grey Wolf, Daniel Eagleclaw, Michael Sunwalker, Robert Blackstone. And in the darkness, far from command ears, they began a conversation that would change everything. They had bled together, they had broken together, and when the training nearly drove them to madness, they were the reason each other survived. Now, standing at the edge of something far darker than training, they faced the hardest decision of their lives. Joseph Running Bear spoke first. His voice was steady, but the weight behind it was heavy. He said he could not carry out the order. Killing unarmed women and elderly men wasn't war, it was slaughter. And if he crossed that line, he would never be able to face his grandfather in the spirit world. He said it plainly. Doing this would strip him of his humanity. The Apache way did not allow it. He would rather die with honor than live as a murderer. One by one, the others spoke. Thomas Whitehawk said his grandmother had been killed by American soldiers during the reservation wars. He had joined the army to prove that Apaches could be patriots, not to become the same kind of man who destroyed his own family. Samuel Grey Wolf said the ancestors were watching, and he would not shame them. Daniel Eagleclaw said fewer words than the rest. Some orders, he said, should never be followed. That night, the 6 Apache soldiers made a pact. They would refuse the mission, they would explain why, and they would accept whatever came next. They knew what that meant: execution, dishonor, their families being told they were cowards or traitors, their names erased, their stories buried. But they also knew something else. Some things were worse than death. Before they parted, Joseph Running Bear performed a small ceremony his grandfather had taught him. He had none of the sacred items, no tobacco, no feathers, no medicine bundle. All he had was his voice and the words carried by generations before him. He sang softly so the guards wouldn't hear, a song asking the Creator for strength, for clarity, for courage to face whatever waited ahead with dignity. Thomas Whitehawk later wrote about that moment in a letter he never sent. The letter was found after his disappearance and eventually reached his family. He described feeling warmth fill the ruined farmhouse despite the cold Italian night. He wrote of sensing presences around them, unseen but undeniable, warriors who had faced impossible choices long before them. In that moment, he knew they were right. Whatever happened to their bodies, their souls would remain untouched. Samuel Grey Wolf spoke last. He was the oldest at 27, a quiet man who rarely shared his thoughts. That night he told them about a vision he had seen years earlier in a sweat lodge. He had seen himself at a crossroads in a foreign land. One path led through fire and blood into darkness, the other through suffering and shadow toward light. He said he hadn't understood it until now. Now he knew which path was his. The 6 men returned to their bunks, knowing everything would change by morning. They didn't sleep. They lay awake in the darkness, alone with their thoughts, memories of home, of family, of the land that raised them. Outside, the Italian mountains stood black against a sky full of stars. Somewhere in those mountains, villages slept peacefully, unaware their fate was being debated by men they would never meet. By morning, 6 Apache warriors would choose those lives over their own. At dawn, Joseph Running Bear requested a meeting with Major Hartley. He spoke calmly, respectfully. He said he and 5 others could not carry out the order. He cited the warrior code of his people, the laws of war that protected civilians, his conscience, his belief in a creator who would judge him for his actions. Hartley listened without a word. When Running Bear finished, Hartley asked if he understood the consequences of refusing a direct order. Running Bear said yes. Hartley asked if the others were ready to face those consequences too. Running Bear said they were. What happened next stayed classified for decades. Army Intelligence Report 773-44, sealed until 2009, records the following 72 hours in cold, bureaucratic language. But between those lines is a story of courage, cruelty, and a cover-up that reached the highest levels of command. The Apache soldiers were immediately arrested. They were locked in a stone cellar beneath the farmhouse that served as headquarters. Their weapons were taken, their personal belongings confiscated, letters from home, photographs, and sacred items tied to their spiritual identity. They were given no food, only a little water. Guards stood watch with orders to shoot anyone who tried to escape. For 3 days, the 6 men waited. They sang Apache songs to keep their spirits strong. They prayed. They talked about their families, their homes, the land they loved. They never spoke about what was coming. They didn't have to. On the 3rd day, Colonel Theodore Ashford arrived from Site 11. He had been flown to Italy for one reason: to end this. Ashford was furious. Months of brutal training, of breaking and reshaping these men, and now, at the critical moment, they were defying him. He went into the cellar alone, carrying a pistol and a folder of documents. He gave them an offer. They could change their minds, carry out the mission, return to their unit as if nothing had happened, no punishment, clean records. Their refusal would disappear. All they had to do was say yes. Joseph Running Bear answered for all of them. No. What followed was later described by Sergeant Frank Morrison, a military policeman stationed outside the cellar. He reported shouting, sounds of violence, and then a long, horrifying silence. 45 minutes later, Ashford emerged. His uniform was disheveled. His knuckles were bloody. He ordered Morrison to arrange transport for the prisoners and warned him to tell no one what he had witnessed. That night, the 6 Apache soldiers were taken away in a covered truck to a location Morrison could not identify. He never saw them again. When he later asked what had happened, he was told the matter was classified and that he should forget they ever existed. Officially, the record states that Joseph Running Bear, Thomas Whitehawk, Samuel Greywolf, Daniel Eagleclaw, Michael Sunwalker, and Robert Blackstone were killed in action during a combat operation in central Italy on March 19, 1944. That was the lie. And for more than 60 years, it was the only version the world was allowed to hear. After the 6 Apache soldiers disappeared, the machinery of official history moved quickly. Letters were sent to their families, carefully worded condolences, praises of bravery and sacrifice. Medals were issued posthumously. Their names were carved into memorials beside thousands of other fallen soldiers. On paper, they were heroes who died in combat, but the paper was lying. Decades later, small cracks began to appear in that story. Researchers studying the treatment of Native American soldiers during World War II noticed something off. Dates didn't line up. Locations didn't make sense. The deeper they looked, the less real the official version became. The combat operation that supposedly killed the 6 Apache men never happened. The coordinates listed in the casualty reports pointed to an empty field, no battle, no engagement, no evidence of fighting. Even worse, the dates on the documents had been changed multiple times, clear signs of deliberate manipulation. Someone had rewritten history on purpose. Then, in 1907, a 91-year-old woman in New Mexico reached out to a journalist. Her name was Mary Eagleclaw. She was the sister of Daniel Eagleclaw. Mary knew her time was almost over, and before she died, she needed someone to hear the truth. She said that in 1946, 2 years after her brother was officially declared killed in action, a stranger came to her door. He was white, middle-aged, and spoke with a faint German accent. He told her he had served alongside Daniel in Italy. Then he told her something that shattered everything she thought she knew. Daniel hadn't died in battle, and what he said next was so terrifying that Mary stayed silent for more than 60 years, afraid that speaking it aloud might put her life at risk. The man told her that Daniel and the 5 other Apache soldiers had been executed by their own commanders, shot in the back of the head, buried in unmarked graves somewhere in the Italian mountains. Their crime wasn't cowardice, it wasn't desertion, it was refusing to murder innocent people. They were killed for having consciences. Mary asked him why he was telling her this. Why come now? Why reopen a wound she had finally begun to heal? The man said he couldn't live with it anymore. He had been there when it happened. He hadn't pulled the trigger, but he hadn't stopped it either. He followed orders, stayed quiet, and tried to forget. But forgetting was impossible. The faces of those 6 Apache soldiers followed him into his dreams. Their voices echoed in his thoughts. Every time he looked into a mirror, he felt their eyes staring back at him. He told Mary that Daniel died last. The others were executed first, one by one, while Running Bear was forced to watch. Colonel Ashford wanted to break him, to strip away his courage, to prove that his beliefs were nothing but superstition. But Running Bear never broke.
As each brother fell, he sang an Apache death song. When his turn came, he met Ashford's eyes without fear. His final words, spoken in his native language, were a curse on those who had betrayed them. The man told Mary he believed that curse was real. Everyone involved, he said, had suffered since. Accidents, madness, suicides, sudden illnesses. Even Ashford hadn't escaped. The colonel died under mysterious circumstances in 1945, only months after the war ended. His body was found in his office at a military base in Virginia. The official cause was heart failure, but the man said Ashford's face was frozen in absolute terror, as if he had seen something in his final moments that no human should ever see. Mary asked the man what he wanted. He said he wanted nothing but forgiveness. He wanted her to know her brother had died a hero, that Daniel and the others had made a choice most men would never have the courage to make, and he wanted someone, anyone, to remember the truth, even if it could never be spoken publicly. Before he left, he handed Mary a small bundle wrapped in cloth. Inside was a stone arrowhead on a leather cord, an heirloom Daniel had worn since childhood. Mary pressed it to her chest and wept. She never saw the man again. She never learned his name, but she kept the arrowhead for the rest of her life, and she kept the secret until she felt death approaching. Only then did she decide the truth could no longer stay buried. Now, I need to pause here, because what comes next reveals what happened to the man who visited Mary Eagleclaw, the investigation that finally exposed the truth, and the chilling discovery that the execution of those 6 Apache soldiers was connected to something far bigger than one brutal colonel. When you're ready to continue, let me know, because this next part proves that the spirits of those warriors never rested, and that justice, even when delayed by decades, has a way of finding its targets. The journalist Mary contacted was Catherine Reyes. For 15 years, Reyes had chased stories mainstream media wouldn't touch: government cover-ups, military crimes, abuses against indigenous communities.
The moment she heard Mary's account, she knew this would be the most important investigation of her life. For the next 2 years, Reyes followed every lead. She filed dozens of Freedom of Information Act requests, interviewed surviving family members, traveled to Italy, and walked the same mountains where the executions were said to have taken place. She consulted military historians, forensic experts, and native elders, searching for answers buried for over 60 years. And the resistance she faced was unreal. Files that should have been declassified stayed sealed. Witnesses backed out without explanation. Her computer was hacked 3 times. Her phone records showed calls she never made to numbers she didn't recognize. Someone was watching her, and someone desperately wanted this story buried. Still, Reyes kept going. Piece by piece, the truth surfaced. The first real breakthrough came in 2008 when she discovered references to Army Intelligence Report 773-44, the same report long claimed to have been destroyed in a 1973 records fire. Reyes didn't buy it. She tracked down a retired Army archivist named Harold Patterson, 84 years old and living in a Missouri nursing home. Doctors told him he had less than 6 months left. Patterson told her the fire wasn't an accident. Certain files had been removed beforehand and stored elsewhere. He didn't know where, but he remembered one thing clearly. Among the saved files was a folder marked 773-44. It concerned an incident involving Native American personnel in Italy. With that confirmation, Reyes pushed harder. She contacted disillusioned veterans, intelligence insiders who were tired of protecting crimes in the name of national security. And in January of 2009, one of those contacts delivered a package to her front door. What was inside would finally force the truth into the light. Inside the package was a full photocopy of Army Intelligence Report 773-44, all 47 pages. Tucked inside was a handwritten note with just one sentence: "The truth should not die with the guilty." As Catherine Reyes read the report, everything Mary Eagleclaw had said was confirmed, and then some. The document detailed the arrest, detention, and execution of 6 Apache soldiers in March of 1944 for the crime of insubordination. It named names: Colonel Theodore Ashford as the officer who ordered the executions, Major William Hartley as the man who issued the original command to kill civilians. It included sworn testimony from Sergeant Frank Morrison, the military policeman who had stood outside the cellar while Ashford went in. And then there was an addendum, classified at the highest level. In it, Ashford described what he called the necessary elimination of witnesses. According to the report, at least 4 other American soldiers who knew about the executions died under suspicious circumstances in the weeks that followed. One in a jeep crash on a mountain road, one from so-called friendly fire, 2 more who simply vanished, listed as missing in action. The report concluded with a recommendation: destroy all records related to the incident. Conduct no further investigation. That recommendation was approved by a general's name had been completely redacted. But the report wasn't finished. Attached at the back was a hand-drawn map. It showed the approximate burial site of the 6 Apache soldiers. There were no precise coordinates, just landmarks: a strange rock formation, the ruins of a monastery, a stream flowing down from higher peaks. Reyes understood immediately what this meant. The graves could still be found. In the spring of 2009, Reyes assembled a search team and returned to the Italian mountains. With her were a forensic anthropologist, a ground-penetrating radar specialist, 2 Apache tribal representatives, and a documentary filmmaker to record everything.
After reviewing the evidence, the Italian government granted permission for the search. Local guides helped navigate the terrain. For 3 weeks, they searched. They hiked mile after mile of brutal mountain trails, checking every location that matched the map, and they found nothing. 65 years had reshaped the land. Forests had swallowed open fields. Landslides had altered hillsides. The ruined monastery on the map had collapsed into rubble, almost indistinguishable from the surrounding stone. Reyes was starting to lose hope. Then, on the 19th night, something happened. One of the Apache representatives, a man named William Running Bear, had a dream. William was the great-nephew of Joseph Running Bear. He had joined the expedition to honor his ancestor and to bring peace to his family. In his dream, he saw Joseph standing on a mountainside, pointing toward a grove of twisted pine trees. Joseph spoke one word in Apache.
Here. William woke before dawn and told the team. The forensic anthropologist was skeptical. The filmmaker was fascinated. Reyes, who had learned to trust what couldn't be explained, made a decision. She asked William to lead them. For 4 hours, they followed him through terrain that didn't exist on any map. The twisted pines from the dream never appeared. But then, William stopped. He pointed to a shallow depression beneath a stand of ancient oak trees. "This is the place," he said. Ground-penetrating radar confirmed it. 4 feet below the surface were disturbances consistent with buried human remains. They began to dig. What they uncovered would later be confirmed through forensic analysis. 6 sets of skeletal remains. Each skull showed a gunshot wound to the back of the head, execution style. Personal items matched family descriptions. Dog tags had been intentionally defaced, but were still partially legible. And then there was something else, something that silenced everyone. Around the neck of one skeleton was a leather cord with a stone arrowhead. It was identical to the arrowhead the mysterious visitor had given Mary Eagleclaw in 1946. Identical. Mary had died in 2008, 1 year before the discovery. She never knew her brother's grave had been found, but her granddaughter, Teresa, was there when the remains were exhumed. Teresa held the arrowhead her grandmother had kept for 60 years and compared it to the one lifted from the earth. They weren't similar, they were exactly the same. The same chip on the left edge, the same worn markings on the leather cord. It shouldn't have been possible. 2 identical arrowheads, one above ground, one buried with the body. The forensic team had no explanation. William Running Bear knelt beside the grave and began to pray in Apache. Later, back in the United States, Teresa Eagleclaw donated both arrowheads to the Smithsonian's National Museum of the American Indian. Experts examined them extensively. No one could explain how 2 physically identical artifacts could exist separately. Tests confirmed both were authentic, over 200 years old. Some suggested the arrowhead given to Mary was a replica. Materials analysis proved otherwise. Others argued the visitor in 1946 must have created a perfect copy. But no technology of that era could have done that. The tribal elders offered another explanation. They said the arrowhead existed in 2 places at once because the spirits willed it, that Daniel Eagleclaw had sent a piece of himself to his sister, a bridge between worlds, a bond that death couldn't break. They said such things weren't impossible for warriors who walked between realms, and that the 6 Apache soldiers had earned that power through the purity of their sacrifice. In the fall of 2009, the remains of the 6 men were returned to the United States. A ceremony was held at Arlington National Cemetery. Descendants of all 6 soldiers were present, along with Apache tribal leaders, military officials, and members of Congress.
65 years late, they finally received full military honors.
Their names were spoken aloud, their stories told, flag-draped coffins lowered into the ground with the respect they had always deserved. But the story didn't end there. Catherine Reyes kept digging. She discovered the order to execute civilians hadn't started with Hartley or Ashford. It came from far higher up, from commanders who believed total war demanded total ruthlessness, and that moral resistance was something to be erased. Reyes uncovered evidence of at least 12 other cases during World War II where American soldiers were imprisoned or killed for refusing illegal orders. Native Americans, African Americans, soldiers deemed expendable by a system that never saw them as fully human. Every one of those cases had been wiped from the official record. And that meant the story of the 6 Apache warriors was only the beginning. The witnesses were silenced, the families were misled, and the truth was sealed away. When Reyes finally published her findings, the book earned critical praise, but barely a ripple in the mainstream. The military denied everything. The government declined to comment. And for most Americans, the names of 6 Apache soldiers and the conspiracy that erased them for more than 60 years remained completely unknown. The official response followed a familiar script. Carefully crafted statements expressed sympathy for the families while firmly rejecting any claim that executions had occurred. Spokespersons argued that Reyes had misunderstood scattered documents, that the skeletal remains could belong to anyone, that the accounts were nothing more than the fading memories of elderly witnesses and the imagination of a journalist chasing attention. But Reyes had expected this. She came prepared with evidence that couldn't be waved away. DNA testing confirmed the remains belonged to individuals of Native American ancestry. Forensic analysis showed bullet wounds matching the exact caliber used by American forces in that region during the war. Even the damaged dog tags were authenticated by military historians. And then there were the documents. The government refused to verify them, but experts recognized all the signs of genuine classified material. The formatting, the language, the reference numbers, all aligning perfectly with verified records from the same era. In 2011, a small group of congressional representatives introduced a resolution calling for an official investigation into the deaths of the 6 Apache soldiers. It never made it to a vote. Instead, it vanished, quietly buried in committee. Behind closed doors, its sponsors were warned that pushing the issue would end their careers. One representative who spoke publicly received threatening phone calls at home. Another discovered her office computers had been remotely accessed, files deleted without explanation. The message was unmistakable. Some secrets are guarded by forces far stronger than any single politician. Still, the truth found ways to travel through paths that couldn't be shut down. Within Native American communities, the story spread. It became legend, a lesson passed down as a parable of honor, courage, and the cost of conscience. Young Apache men and women learned the names of Joseph Running Bear and his brothers, how they chose death over becoming murderers. The 6 soldiers became symbols of resistance, proof that the warrior spirit could not be corrupted. And then there were the quieter stories, the ones told in whispers, around fires or behind closed doors. Stories of strange moments, events that felt connected to the 6 warriors. One came from an Apache man who served as an Army Ranger during the Iraq War. While on a night patrol in Fallujah, his unit detained civilians suspected of aiding insurgents. When an elderly man refused to speak, the commanding officer gave a direct order: execute him.
The ranger raised his weapon and felt a hand on his shoulder. No one was behind him, but he heard a voice, speaking Apache, telling him to lower the gun. He disobeyed the order and later reported his commander for war crimes. Only afterward did he learn that his great-great-uncle had been one of the 6 soldiers executed in Italy. He believed his ancestor had stopped him from making an irreversible mistake. In New Mexico, a woman claimed she saw 6 figures walking across the desert at twilight. They wore uniforms from another era, moved in single file, made no sound, and vanished at the horizon. She said they appeared every year on March 19th, the anniversary of the executions. In Arizona, a park ranger discovered an old Army dog tag half buried near the San Carlos Reservation. The name read Thomas Whitehawk. There was no explanation for how it ended up there. Whitehawk never returned from Italy, and his belongings were believed lost forever. The ranger gave the tag to Thomas's granddaughter. She placed it in a medicine bundle and prayed for his spirit. You can call these coincidences, tricks of memory, the human instinct to find meaning where none exists. Or you can listen to the Apache elders. They believe that warriors who die with honor do not truly die. They become guardians, watching over their descendants, stepping in when necessary, protecting the values they lived and died for. Maybe the 6 soldiers who refused to kill civilians in 1944 are still on patrol, still standing watch, still saying no to orders that violate the sacred laws of human dignity. So what does their story mean for us today? It means courage isn't just about facing enemy fire. Sometimes the greatest courage is standing up to your own side, your commanders, your institution, your country, and saying there are lines you will not cross. It means honor isn't measured by medals, promotions, or praise. True honor is defined by what you refuse to do, even when refusal costs you everything. The 6 Apache soldiers didn't change the outcome of the war. They didn't save cities or turn the tide of battle. They never saw their grandchildren or grew old surrounded by family. They died in an unmarked grave in a foreign land, murdered by the nation they volunteered to serve. But they saved something greater than their lives. They saved their souls. They kept faith with their ancestors. They proved that being a warrior isn't about killing, it's about protecting, not about destruction, but about honor. And in doing so, they left behind a legacy that will outlast every empire they ever fought for. If you're watching this right now, that legacy lives on with you. Now you know their names: Joseph Running Bear, Thomas Whitehawk, Samuel Greywolf, Daniel Eagleclaw, Michael Sunwalker, Robert Blackstone. You know what they did, you know why they did it, and you know this: these men were not traitors, they were not cowards, they were heroes of the highest order. Carry their story with you, speak their names, tell others what they stood for, and remember them when you face your own hard choices, when the easy road pulls you toward darkness and the difficult one points toward the light. Remember this above all: we serve a God who sees everything, a God who knows the truths hidden in classified archives and buried in unmarked graves, a God who values obedience to His law above obedience to any human authority. Jesus Christ did not come to bring peace through violence, but peace through sacrifice, not victory through domination, but victory through love.
The 6 Apache warriors understood this truth, even if they spoke it through the traditions of their ancestors rather than the language of the church. They knew that some orders must never be followed, that some doors must remain closed, that some souls are never for sale, no matter the price.
When everything around them demanded blood, they chose righteousness. They chose to meet their Creator with clean hands and pure hearts, and God welcomed them home. If you're struggling right now, if you feel pressure to compromise who you are, if the world is telling you that right and wrong are outdated ideas with no place in modern life, remember the Apache 6. Remember that integrity isn't a luxury, it's a necessity. Remember that your soul is worth more than any career, any relationship, any reward this world can offer. Turn to God. Turn to Jesus Christ. Let them guide you through the darkness, just as they guided those warriors through their final moments. And know this, when your time comes to face final judgment, you will not stand alone. You will stand alongside all who chose honor over convenience, truth over lies, light over darkness. The 6 soldiers are waiting, not with judgment, but with welcome, not with condemnation, but with brotherhood, ready to embrace everyone who makes the same choice they did, the choice to remain human in an inhuman world. May God bless you and keep you. May He give you the strength to stand when others fall. May He grant you the courage of Joseph Running Bear, the faith of Thomas Whitehawk, the wisdom of Samuel Greywolf, the resilience of Daniel Eagleclaw, the heart of Michael Sunwalker, and the spirit of Robert Blackstone. And may their sacrifice never be forgotten from this generation to the last. Today, their graves at Arlington stand marked with simple white stones, identical to thousands of others resting in silent rows on sacred ground. Most visitors walk past without ever knowing the story behind those names, without realizing the extraordinary courage those men showed when courage meant certain death. But the stones are there, the names are there, and the truth, though it took 65 years to surface, is now part of the permanent record. Sometimes justice comes too late for the living. Sometimes vindication takes decades to arrive, but it always arrives, because there is a force in this universe greater than the lies of powerful men, greater than government secrecy, greater than imposed silence. That force is justice, and its source is God. Until next time, stay vigilant, stay faithful, and never stop searching for the truth that sets us free.